There is no end in sight to the Israeli onslaught in Gaza, though the Qatari Prime Minister has said a deal between Israel and Hamas on return of hostages is close to fruition. Qatari Prime Minister Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdul Rahman Al Thani has said his confidence is growing and that a deal will be reached soon. Sheikh Mohammed said the challenges facing the agreement are just practical or even logistical.
The deal is going through ups and downs from time to time throughout the last few weeks. But I think that, I'm now more confident that we are close enough to reach to a deal that can bring the people safely back to their homes, whether they are the hostages on Hamas side or whatever the exchange that will take place from the Israeli side.
This even as a member of Israel's war cabinet, Benny Gantz, said his priority is to get the hostages back. He added that Israel has decades, if needed, to destroy Hamas. But the country does not have that much time to return the abducted people back home. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the White House rejected a Washington Post report which claimed Israel, the US and Hamas had reached an agreement to release the hostages. It said a deal on release of hostages would happen in exchange for a 5-day pause in the fighting. Netanyahu said there is no deal on the table and he cannot elaborate further. According to reports, Hamas is ready to release 60 to 70 hostages. They demand a 5-day ceasefire. However, Israel is against this idea, as it claims Hamas will use the ceasefire to regroup. Families of the hostages continue to pile pressure on the Israeli Prime Minister for their release. Thousands of marchers, including relatives of more than 50 hostages held by Hamas, reached the Prime Minister's office on Saturday. However, on Friday, they had embarked on their 4th leg of a 5-day walk from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem and called on the Israeli government to bring some 240 hostages home. The marchers traversed 70 kilometers to Netanyahu's office and urged Israel's war cabinet to do more to rescue their loved ones. Early in the war, Qatar negotiated a deal with Hamas to free 2 American Israeli hostages. A few days later, the militants released 2 elderly Israeli women, but since then, nothing substantial has happened. Scott Lucas is a professor of international politics, Clinton Institute, University College Dublin. Is now joining us live from Birmingham in the United Kingdom. Professor Scott, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for having me here.
Let's talk about the hostage situation. Qatar says a deal is in the offing until they clear some logistical issues. Netanyahu is adamant on holding any kind of talks with Hamas, while Hamas has given an ultimatum of a 5-day pause in the fighting. How is this likely to play out in the coming weeks?
I think let's read this step by step. First of all, in terms of if we get a 5-day humanitarian pause, you have the Qatari message, which is that the deal is close, but it's now up to Israel. And that's where we get the mixed messages. On the one hand, you have Benjamin Netanyahu, who gave this very angry speech last night that he would never cave into international pressure. He denied reports that a deal was imminent. In other words, he was talking very tough. On the other hand, there was a very important message that you've mentioned by Benny Gantz. Now, Benny Gantz is a member of the War Cabinet. He's the former chief of the Israeli Defense Staff. And he said, as you recounted it, look, we have time. We have time to deal with Hamas. It's the hostages that are the immediate priority. That signals that Gantz, at least, is looking for this deal to take place, even if Netanyahu is holding out. So I think we've got a possible split in the Israeli War Cabinet to watch, or Netanyahu could be bluffing. But that leads to a second question, which is, let's say we get the pause, what happens next? And there again, we have different signals from Israel. We have the signals from Gantz that we have time. We don't have to move immediately. But other Israeli voices have been saying in the past few days, they're going to extend the intensive bombing of the north of Gaza and the ground offensive to the southern Gaza Strip. Now, they had said the southern Gaza Strip was safe, that civilians could evacuate there, even though they had continued to attack it. Now Israel is no longer saying that the southern Gaza Strip is safe around Han Yunis. So we're finely balanced here. as to whether the Israelis pull back and allow this pause, or whether they double down, at least Netanyahu doubles down, and expands the attacks.
Right. Professor, Israel claims that Hamas plans to regroup if at all a ceasefire is initiated. Who is playing to the gallery here? 1 month of fighting, countless leaders and countries calling on Hamas to release the hostages, and still nothing.
Well, the easy answer is that both sides play to the gallery. I mean, we're not talking angels and devils here. And that is, we have seen wave after wave of Israeli propaganda, including in recent days, over their siege and then the invasion of Al-Shifa Hospital as patients died by claiming it was a Hamas command post. On the other hand, Hamas, of course, denies any type of responsibility over its mass killing of Israeli civilians and foreign nationals on October 7th, and its continued holding of the hostages. Let's break this down again in terms of where we are after a month, as you put it. And that is, the international community told the Israelis almost from the start of these operations, just after the Hamas mass killing, how do you get rid of Hamas? How do you get rid of it? They warned the Israelis, you cannot militarily, quote, destroy Hamas. All you'll do is drive civilians closer to Hamas. And even if Hamas goes to ground and you think you've defeated them, you're building up a problem for years to come. The Israeli war cabinet to this point hasn't listened. Even if Hamas does not attack Israel in the next few weeks, next few months, even if many commanders are killed, you're building up the conditions in Gaza, not just for Hamas to regroup, but for the civilians of Gaza to support Hamas and to support whatever they might do in the next cycle of violence against the Israelis.
Professor, finally, the calls for a ceasefire have grown enormously, but none between the two, that is Israel and Hamas, is willing to listen, even to the so-called international community, like you mentioned there. What does that tell you?
Well, I think, let's go step by step. If we get a 5-day humanitarian pause, what the international community is hoping, including the Indian government, for example, is that you can extend that pause and make it longer. So 5 days becomes a week, becomes a couple of weeks, or you have another pause very quickly that follows, and then you back off of the extension of the fighting. But I think we've already posed the question, which is, will the Israeli war cabinet allow that? Will they simply allow a one-off humanitarian pause to be extended? And as you quite rightly put it, will Hamas allow that? Will Hamas allow civilians to be moved to safety? Will Hamas allow some type of international provision for security in Gaza, which bypasses Hamas, at least temporarily? Because I think most of the international community, while criticizing the Israeli attacks, is saying at the same time that Hamas is no longer a legitimate government in Gaza after what they did on October 7th.
Professor Scott Lucas, thank you very much for giving us time today and for talking to WION World as well.
Thanks to you and your viewers.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.